When most people picture the fall of Rome, they imagine barbarians smashing through city gates, legions breaking apart on distant frontiers, or emperors quietly assassinated inside luxurious marble halls. But empires rarely collapse only because of outside enemies. They decay internally, and one of the most destructive forces behind that decay is almost always money. Rome did not fall simply due to invasion or corruption. It fell because its currency failed, and the warning buried in that. Collapse still applies to every modern economy that believes it can manipulate money without consequences. So let's rewind the story. For hundreds of years, Rome's economic foundation rested on the silver denarius, first issued around 201 BCE, struck from nearly pure silver and accepted throughout the empire and beyond. Soldiers were paid in it, traders insisted on it, and ordinary citizens saved their wealth in it. The denarius was more than a coin. It represented trust, solidified into metal. Rome's power and the value of its currency were inseparable. As long as faith in Rome endured, faith in its money remained intact. But governing an empire is costly. Armies required constant pay, infrastructure demanded upkeep, and wars drained resources without mercy. By the 2nd century CE, Rome was stretched to its limits, defending borders from Germanic tribes in the north, Parthians in the east, and internal instability at home. Tax income could no longer match the expanding military burden. So emperors turned to a familiar shortcut, debasement, rather than risk political backlash from higher taxes. They quietly reduced the silver content of the denarius, and the historical record makes the decline unmistakable. Under Augustus, the coin contained roughly 95% silver. Under Caracalla, in the early 3rd century, it was closer to half silver, and by the reign of Gallienus, the percentage had fallen to under 5%. A coin once forged from real value became little more. Then bronze covered with a thin silver coating. People noticed immediately. Inflation set in as money lost its anchor. Prices surged as confidence evaporated. Grain that once sold for a single denarius suddenly demanded dozens. This was not a theoretical problem discussed by elites. It devastated everyday Romans. Soldiers demanded higher pay just to survive. Merchants rejected debased coins and returned to barter or demanded gold. Local trade systems collapsed as trust vanished, and each time, confidence weakened. Emperors responded by minting even more inferior coins, hoping quantity could replace value. It became a self-reinforcing spiral, one that has repeated throughout history whenever inflation takes hold. The breakdown reached its height during the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome endured nearly 5 decades of turmoil marked by invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic breakdown. Emperors came and went at astonishing speed, some ruling only weeks. Before assassination, beneath the political chaos lay a shattered monetary system. Taxes were collected in coins that declined in value by the year. Farmers abandoned land rather than surrender harvests for worthless money. Trade routes fragmented, and the state resorted to desperate policies, including price controls and mandatory labor. To keep the economy functioning, none succeeded. Emperor Diocletian attempted a final fix in 301 CE by issuing the edict on maximum prices, setting legal limits on the prices of thousands of goods and wages, enforcing compliance with the threat of death. The policy failed catastrophically. Prices cannot be commanded when the currency itself is broken. Black markets flourished. Legal commerce collapsed, and citizens learned a hard truth. Laws cannot repair dishonest money. Ultimately, Rome abandoned the denarius altogether. Constantine later introduced the gold solidus around 312 CE, a stable coin that restored limited confidence and endured for centuries in the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. But by then the Western Empire was already beyond repair. Decades of debasement had hollowed out its economic core. Armies could no longer be maintained. Trade networks had disintegrated, and trust had vanished. Rome's collapse was not a single moment, but a prolonged unraveling, with currency failure as one of its sharpest threads. So what relevance does this have today? It reveals a timeless rule. Destroy money, and you undermine the foundations of empire. Rome believed it could deceive its people with coins that appeared unchanged while containing less real value. Modern governments believe they can achieve the same illusion through printing, monetary manipulation, and inflation-driven debt reduction. But the outcome never changes. Ordinary people bear the cost. Wealth erodes and trust dies. Rome learned this lesson painfully. And ignoring it does not make it disappear. History kept repeating the same warning after Rome. Every major inflationary collapse follows the same pattern. Governments dilute money to cover spending. Elites shield themselves with tangible assets. And the public is left poorer. Rome's monetary breakdown was simply the first fully documented example. A blueprint repeated again and again. Move forward to the 20th century, and the similarities grow louder. After World War I, Germany faced overwhelming reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. The government responded by printing money. To meet obligations, believing paper could replace real value just as Rome once struck weaker coins. By 1923, hyperinflation consumed the economy. Bread that cost 1 mark before the war cost hundreds of billions within years. Workers transported wages in wheelbarrows. Retirees lost everything. Savings became meaningless. And just as in Rome, debtors benefited while asset holders emerged stronger. The resulting desperation fueled political extremism and cleared the path for Hitler's rise. Zimbabwe followed an identical script decades later. Facing collapsing production, land seizures, and growing debt, the government relied on the printing press. By 2008, inflation reached levels almost impossible to comprehend. Prices doubled daily. Shops could not update fast enough. And eventually the nation abandoned its currency entirely, forcing citizens to transact in foreign money. Yet the lesson is not confined to extreme cases. The same Roman pattern persists in developed economies. Look at the United States. In 1971, President Nixon removed the dollar from the gold standard, cutting the last tie to a physical anchor. The dollar became a fiat currency supported solely by confidence. And just as in Rome, the temptation to overspend became irresistible, debt expanded, money supply ballooned, and inflation slowly gnawed at purchasing power. We may not carry cash in wheelbarrows, but a dollar today buys a fraction of what it once did. The appearance remains, but the substance fades. Governments frame inflation as growth, rising wages as prosperity, debt as investment, and soaring markets as national success, even when most citizens own little of that wealth like Roman emperors. They insist nothing essential has changed while quietly extracting value from every paycheck and savings account. What makes the danger greater today is scale. Rome's collapse was imperial, Weimar's was national, Zimbabwe's was regional. But today the global economy runs almost entirely on fiat money, massive leverage, and central banks prepared to create trillions instantly. Meaning the next crisis will not respect borders, will cascade worldwide. And as history always shows, elites with real assets will adapt, while those dependent on salaries, pensions, and savings will suffer most. So what should individuals take from Rome's monetary collapse first? Inflation is never accidental. It is deliberate policy, a silent tax that has broken societies for millennia. Second, true. Wealth does not reside in paper or digital balances, but in assets that endure when money fails: land, skills, productive enterprises, and resources. Third, stability is never permanent. Early Romans would have laughed at the idea their coins could become worthless. Germans in 1913 dismissed the thought of wheelbarrows of cash. Zimbabweans once believed independence guaranteed prosperity, yet the same sequence unfolded every time. Rome reminds us that financial collapse often unfolds slowly, before arriving suddenly. Once money loses credibility, society itself begins to fray. Contracts collapse, trade disintegrates, militaries weaken, and governments lose legitimacy. Invasions may finish the process, but the true destroyer always sits inside the treasury. And here is the final truth. History rarely repeats line for line, but ignorance guarantees familiar outcomes. Rome's currency crisis was not simply about incompetent rulers or corrupt elites. It exposed how fragile money becomes when controlled by unchecked power. And that fragility still defines our world today. If this shifted how you see history, subscribe, because history is still teaching, whether we listen or not.